NYC has had ranked choice voting, or instant runoff voting as it's also called, since 2019. The first major election here in the city to have ranked choice voting was the 2021 mayoral primary, and now we just had the 2025 mayoral primary where Zoran actually fucking beat out Cuomo. I'm still on cloud 9 over that if you can't already tell. And ranked choice voting plays a factor into that outcome even happening in the first place, increasing my already favorable view of ranked choice voting by tenfold. You see, ranked choice voting actually allows voters to have a real choice in an election. They get to rank candidates in order of preference. There is no lesser of two evils bullshit or the risk of voting for a candidate who may be a spoiler for another candidate. Here in NYC, during a Dem primary, you get to vote up to 5 candidates who you feel align best with your interests, or at the very least, candidates you feel are much preferable to other candidates, and if no candidate outright wins the first round with over 50% of the vote, then onwards to the forthcoming rounds where the candidates with the fewest first rank votes are eliminated, and then the votes from those who rank those candidates first get redistributed to who they rank second, third, fourth, so on and so forth, until a candidate reaches over 50% of the vote. Mamdani may not have reached 50% of the vote in the first round, but he is still over 7 points ahead of Cuomo. Brad Lander, who cross-endorsed Mamdani and vice versa, placed in third with over 100,000 votes. It's a safe bet to assume that many Lander voters placed Mamdani in second on their ballots or anywhere on their ballots, and many of those Lander votes will eventually go over to Mamdani. Same thing for many of the votes for most of the other candidates, I'm sure. And then Mamdani will be well over that 50% threshold when all is said and done. And Mamdani and Lander's cross-endorsements got me thinking about an aspect of ranked choice voting I haven't really thought about before. Solidarity between candidates who share a voter base. Zoran Mamdani and Brad Lander were the two frontrunner progressive candidates. If NYC still had the first past-the-post voting system for Dem primaries like what we have nationally and in most states in this country, Zoran Mamdani and Brad Lander would either have to compete for largely the same voter base who is receptive to both candidates but may prefer one slightly over the other, or one would have to drop out before election day and endorse the other candidate, or else Brad Lander would have siphoned up a lot of potential Mamdani voters and vice versa, and that would surely push Andrew Cuomo, the actual shit candidate in this race, to the top. That harkens me back to what we actually saw during the 2020 presidential primary right before Super Tuesday. A lot of the hack establishment candidates like Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar dropped out and endorsed Biden because they knew there was a lot of crossover between each other's voter bases and most importantly Biden's voter base. And of course Biden is who the DNC wanted to be the nominee in 2020, and so to not risk splitting the vote and also to crush the momentum Bernie Sanders had up until that point, they did exactly what I just said. They dropped out and endorsed Biden, redirecting their voters over to him. And of course there was also Elizabeth Warren, who is the moderately more progressive candidate, at least in comparison to other candidates like Biden, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, who had quite a bit of crossover between her voter base and Bernie's voter base, but she didn't drop out, and so she sucked up many potential votes that would have otherwise gone to Bernie had she instead dropped out. If we had ranked choice voting implemented at a national level, there wouldn't be any of this split the vote bullshit. Bernie and Warren could have cross-endorsed each other, campaigned with each other, and an otherwise needless competition for largely the same voter base wouldn't be necessary. First past the post voting does not provide the electorate a real choice, as it can lead to scenarios like the conundrum of having to cast a strategic vote, quote-unquote, for a candidate you may not like and may not align with your views all that much in favor of a candidate you actually do like and largely agree with, because the shittier candidate may have a more realistic shot than the candidate candidate you actually prefer at beating the other candidate from the other party who is even worse. Forcing your voters to compromise with dog shit candidates is not giving them a real choice. You are suppressing them from voting based on their true preferences. And I know why we don't have ranked choice voting on a national level in this country. It's because both major political parties, their donors, corporations, and the ruling class in general do not want to risk candidates rising to prominence on a national level that actually shake up the system, who aren't slaves to capital, who aren't slaves to billionaire and corporate money, and who actually represent the interests of regular everyday people and actually addresses the struggles they go through. And many of those struggles are directly caused by those multi-billionaire donors and multi-billion-dollar corporations. And the ruling class, and those in government who directly benefit from the ruling class, most certainly do not want a national level candidate who can correctly direct the public's anger towards those who are really making their lives worse. And so they do not allow the public to have a real choice between candidates who actually speak to them and candidates they can actually rally behind. Because when you give voters a real choice between a candidate who genuinely represents their interests and has their finger on the pulse of what is actually causing their struggles, versus a candidate who is nothing more than a mouthpiece for the establishment and ruling class, who will they go with? Well, you saw who they went with on Tuesday night here in NYC. A city where, at least for Dem primaries, voters can actually vote based on who they really prefer, and not have to worry about splitting votes or compromising with an objectively shittier candidate in favor of a candidate they actually prefer, or any of the bullshit that arises from how most states in this country on a national scale, conducts elections. That's all I have to say. Bye-bye.